Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Deadly Words, a Born Bad novel, Book 1 by Meghan O'Flynn, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, Poppy, Thin. The name's Poppy Pratt, and I'm at your service, though I'll be the first to admit that I'm not always so agreeable. It's in my nature, I suppose, and always has been. That fire I keep hidden within me is in my blood. Dad says it's like air, like water, anything that sits there unnoticed until you don't have it anymore. I don't have a single reason to disbelieve him. I think we're all one step from a storm if we don't get what we need, but I guess that makes it sound more intense than it is. You won't find maniacs here frothing at the mouth. We aren't those people. Maniac adjacent, maybe, but only if you believe the gossip around town. The gossip. The gossip is not about us, though. It's never about us. It's about the deserters, the folks who leave this or any of the other nearby towns looking for something better. This is the kind of place people move on from. They find a job, they find love, they drive away as fast as they can. It's not a shock that anyone might up and disappear, so most of the gossips cluck their tongues, but they don't worry about the deserters. They don't know they should. I know more than most people. I can read the high school books, even if I'm not allowed to in my elementary classes, and the education I get at home, well, that's a different kind of smart. I rest my elbows on the railing of our narrow back porch, the wood already wet, little slivers embedding themselves in my forearms. I like the way it feels, damp and prickly, like something. Thrashy. I made that word up when I was smaller to describe the way some things get through your defenses against your will, stabbing at your soft spots. I don't think my father likes the word much. That's why he bought me a dictionary, then a thesaurus. He doesn't like anything he's on the outside of, and here in this house, the things you don't know can be dangerous. I press my arms harder against the wood, letting the slivers prick, letting them stab. Thrashy, thrashy, thrashy. Acres of glistening grass stare back at me. Beyond the green, the sky cuts the horizon with a wound of deep indigo that looks like a mark left by a good whipping. I wouldn't know from personal experience. My father would never hit me, but almost every other child I know bears the scars of their parents' rage. It's no wonder people leave here. The wood of the shed is damp, too. I can tell by the darker color along the slab. What little remains of twilight glows against the west-facing boards and paints the roses that bloom around the building with a grayed blush of color. The single window is a hazy black. The wind brushes silky fingers through my hair, but there's electricity in the clouds tonight, not just rain. We're going to get a storm just as well. It happens all the time down here in Alabama. One hurricane after another some years. But this will be a soupy, wet trek toward a flood, and that's worse than the wind. Torrential rains took out our shed one year, the water rising over the concrete slab, picking up the lower boards like it was going to lift the thing clean off a newfangled Noah's Ark. I stood in the doorway, Dad's arm warm at my side, and imagined myself climbing aboard, my blonde curls like corkscrews in the breeze, setting sail for somewhere else. Anywhere else. That was a bad year, until we rebuilt the shed. That's the thing about life, about all things that fall apart, that crumble under pressure. They can't stay crumbled. Not when they're up against me. Nature gave me glue too, and I don't break easy. I blink. The light in the shed goes on, and the glass of the single window glares at me from the other side of the yard, the path to the shed glowing a hazy reddish-orange, tepid, watered down. It still looks like blood. Chapter 2. Poppy, now. I crouch in the wildflowers, a sea of soft, filmy purples and feathery yellows, bulbous pink heads that appear far too heavy for their waif-like stems. I relate to those blossoms the most, the small ones bearing all the weight, straining to find the sun. The world is still expecting them to be pretty, despite their relentless and exhausting crawl toward the sky. I've released my burden as well as I know how, as well as anyone can, but having a father like mine, well, that's a thing a daughter is saddled with for life. I wish I felt more like a Poppy, bright and happy, addictive to anyone who gets near enough. Leave it to Dad to name me after a flower I can't possess without getting arrested. Not that the law ever stopped him. He used to grow them out behind our property in Alabama after our woods burned down, a field of beautiful anarchy rising from the ashes. There's no one else that would be worth a risk like this, Poppy, he'd say. Those words always made me seem more important than any person should be. A single human is most irrelevant in the grand scheme of things except to the other insignificant humans. I inhale deeply, the chill of early autumn biting at my nose. New Hampshire smells different from Alabama. Fresher somehow, unspoiled. I've only been back south once since the trial to sell off Dad's property, but the air down there smells like hate. I could lay in this field and stare at the cerulean sky for hours just breathing. No one would even find me if not for the scarecrow posts that rise from the ground. There are no hay-stuffed men nailed to them, though no bulging plaid shirts or old boots, no burlap heads with black X's sewn on for eyes, no spikes of yellow straw springing from their insides like spurting wounds. Instead, these wooden posts are adorned with little houses of blue and purple that anyone else would believe to be birdhouses. I'm not much like anyone else. Maybe a little like Dad, but no one spends 18 years of their life with someone and doesn't share a single trait. I see him every time I look in the mirror, but I rarely think about that. My therapist says that to hate him is to hate myself, that forgiveness matters. It's a tall order, or so I hear, forgiveness. I think it's easier for most people to live with the guilt than to forgive themselves, let alone forgive someone else. My father was a lot of things, but he was still my father, and he was always good to me. That has to count for something. The thorns from the flowers in my hand prick at my thumb. I force my fist to relax and lay my bouquet on top of the plain gray stone I've settled near the middle of the field. Rose petals fall, thick sanguine drops puddling on his grave. So many roses, their thorns wet with blood, just the way Dad liked them. Hey, Dad. He isn't really buried here, nothing is. But I come here to mourn him, to mourn what might have been if he was a different person, or if I was. To wonder what might have happened if I hadn't turned him in. I'm not sure how I would have turned out if he was still free. Would someone have caught on eventually? Someone following the money trail left by a dead aunt or a long-lost cousin? Dad was a damn fine con man, at least I think he was. His money had to come from somewhere, and he always was a charmer. So conning rich women makes sense. But that was all moot after the night I turned him in. Who cares about a series of financial cons when you have the bloody body of a teenager hanging from the rafters in your shed? At least all that money hidden beneath our floorboards paid my way through school and then some. 36 years old, and I've got 6 acres in a scenic part of New Hampshire where the ground stays frozen until nearly summer. A place where no one knows my father's name. And that's the most important thing to me. Dad is famous whether I want him to be or not. The man with the shed. The man with the hooks. The man who laughed when they came for him. Laughed when his arms covered in blood and the body of an 18-year-old boy hanging from the ceiling, his insides on the outside. I blink at the ground at the puddling rose petals. I hear the way Dad always used to laugh, boisterous like there was nothing in the world except that joke, that moment. All I smell is my boyfriend's blood.